Hello everyone, in this video we're going to cover how we can bring in raster or vector data from QGIS into Google Earth. So here I have QGIS opened and I have already loaded a couple of layers. One is a vector layer that contains contours for this area, and the other one is a raster layer that contains a hillshade map. We're going to start with exporting the vector layer first. We can do that by just right-clicking on the layer and then going under Export and choosing Save Features As. This pop-up window will open up, and the first thing we have to choose is the file format that we want to export to. If I click on the drop-down menu, we can see all of the file formats that we can choose from. Google Earth is going to be able to load Esri shapefiles as well as keyhole markup language or KML. It can also load up some of these other formats like the GPX one, but for most intents and purposes we're going to be sticking either to KML or Esri shapefile. In this case I'm going to cover both of them just to show you the differences when it comes to exporting out of QGIS. So I'm going to choose Esri shapefile for now. And now we have to give the file a file name. We can click on the ellipsis button to the far right and then find the location on our hard drive where we want to save the files to. I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop and I'm going to call these contours. Then I'm going to open up that folder and I'm going to save the file inside of here. I'm going to keep the file name to contours.shp. And I'm going to click on save. For the layer name, we cannot assign anything when we're exporting shapefiles. This is going to be the name of the layer as it appears inside of Google Earth. But as you'll see later, for KML, we are going to be able to assign a name here. Then we can assign the coordinate system for this file if we want to change it from the one that is currently assigned. If we want to do that, we can either expand the drop-down menu here, and we're going to see a list of some of the recently used coordinate systems that we have in QGIS. But if you do not see the coordinate system that you want to assign, then you can click on the globe button to the far right. And this coordinates reference system selector window is going to open up. And from the filter search field, you can type either the name or the EPSG code of the coordinate system that you want to use. In this case, I'm going to leave the coordinate system that we currently have assigned, so I'm not going to assign a new one. Then under the next section, we can choose which attribute fields we want to export together with the data. Now, this is going to depend on your particular data. You may have some of these attribute fields, or you may have a lot more than them or fewer than them. It really depends on your data. But if you're exporting contours and you have an elevation field, then I suggest that you always export that out so that you can see the elevations of these contours inside of Google Earth. So I'm going to click on deselect all to deselect all of these fields, and I want to export just the elevation field. I do not need any of these other fields to be exported because I don't need to see that information inside of Google Earth. Now with that done, I'm going to scroll down. Under the geometry section, you can always leave that at automatic. Under extent, you have the option of exporting just a certain extent from this layer. If you want to export just the entire layer, then you can leave this at default and you don't have to do anything. If you want to export just a certain part of the layer, then you can tick that box under extent and it's going to give you access to the settings. Now you have three options to choose from. You can either export the entire extent of the layer, which is the option that you have enabled by default. You can calculate the extent from another layer. So if I click on the drop-down menu here, we can see all of the layers that we currently have loaded inside of our project. And we can grab the extent of a different layer from the one that we have, and we can calculate the extent that we want to export from that layer. So if I had, for example, a boundary loaded inside of QGIS, I can select the boundary from this drop-down menu and the contours are going to be cropped to that particular boundary extent. And finally, we can calculate the extent from the map canvas. So if I click on that option, everything that we currently have inside of the viewport, including all of the empty space on the sides of our layers, is going to be considered the extent. Now this could be useful if, for example, you want to zoom into just a specific area of your layer and you want to export that area that your viewport is currently focused on. Now with all of that said, in most cases I'm going to stick just to the current layer extent because normally I want to export the entire layer. And if I want to do any cropping of the layer, I'm going to do that using the tools inside of QGIS, and I'm usually not going to do that while I'm exporting the layer from the extent options here. So I'm going to click on current layer extent just to reset all of the settings back to default. Now you can leave the layer options at default. You do not have to set anything here, and you can leave the custom options at default as well. Now finally, if you do not want the exported file to be added to your project again and placed in the layer stack in QGIS, you can untick the box where it says add saved file to map. And with that done, I'm going to press OK, and we will see a confirmation that the file was exported. So I'm going to go to my desktop to open it up. So here we have the contours in the folder that I exported them out to. Now we have the .shp file, which is the main file. It's the one that we are going to import inside of Google Earth. But these other files that are coming together with this shapefile are complementary to it, and they carry information about it, such as the orientation of the features in the world. So these files are crucial for the proper functioning of the main .shp file, and they are referencing each other dynamically. So they should always stay together in the same folder. You should never take the main file or any of the complementary files and move them to a separate location. They should always stay together so that when we are trying to load the shapefile into some GIS application, then it's going to be able to find all of the complementary files and the information they carry so that the SHP file can be displayed correctly. And now all that we have to do is to just grab the .shp file and drop it inside of the Google Earth viewport. Now it's going to immediately ask us if we want to apply a style template to the features. If you just want to import them quickly and you don't want to apply any style to them, just click on no. But if you want to apply a certain style to them, such as a different color or line weight, then you can click on yes, and you can play around with those settings. We have covered in detail how to work with style templates, so if you're interested, please make sure to check that session out. For now, I'm just going to click on no, and now we can see that the contours were placed in the list of places. I just have to tick the visibility box to see them overlaid inside of the viewport. Now, just to quickly cover how to export out to a KML and what are the differences between that file type and Esri shapefile, I'm going to again right-click on the contour layer and go under Export and Save Features As. Then I'm going to change the file format from shapefile to keyhole markup language. And now we again can assign a file name. I'm just going to click on the ellipsis button, and I'm going to browse to the same folder that I saved the contours previously to. I'm just going to call these contours KML, and I'm going to click on save. Now we can assign a layer name, and this is one of the differences between KML and shapefile. Now the layer name again is the name of the layer as it's going to appear inside of Google Earth. So when we imported the shapefile, we just got the name of the file itself because we could not assign a layer name. But with KML, we can assign a layer name, and I'm going to call these contours 2 meters. Again, we have the option to change the coordinate system here on the fly if we need to, but I'm going to leave that at default. We can also select all of the fields that we want to export. Again, I'm going to deselect all of them and export just the elevation field. Probably the biggest difference between KML and shapefile is that with KML, you can retain the symbology of the layer, whereas with shapefile, you cannot do that. The symbology of the layer is simply the style that has been applied to that layer. So if I want to retain the style that I have inside of QGIS for these contours, and I want to have more or less the same style inside of Google Earth, then I can change the settings here under symbology export from no symbology to feature symbology. Then the geometry settings can stay at automatic. We already talked about extent. And with that done, I'm going to uncheck the add saved file to map, and I'm going to press OK. Now the contours were exported. I'm just going to click on the link that QGIS provided me with to open that folder. And all I have to do now is to either double click on the KML file or just drag and drop it inside of Google Earth. Now the contours were imported inside of Google Earth, and there are a couple of things to note. The first is that the name of the layer that we chose inside of QGIS under the export settings has also been retained, and we can see it here under places. The other thing is that the symbology of the contours was also retained. So we have these contours looking the same way that we also had them inside of QGIS. This is not something that we could do with shapefile, because shapefile just does not have that capability. So when we imported the contours as a shapefile, it just assigned a random or a default style to them. One thing that I want to mention is that in the case of contours specifically, it is always a good idea to optimize the contours inside of QGIS before you export them out for use inside of Google Earth. At the moment, our contour file under KML is 23 megabytes, which for contours of this small of an area and this kind of a loose spacing is very large. If we optimize these contours, I'm certain that we could get this file size down to maybe a megabyte or less. So it is a very good idea to always optimize your contours before you share them with other people and before you use them for technical design purposes such as grading, because contours that are not optimized may cause a lot of artifacting or may cause errors when processes are being run on them. Now, how you optimize your contours is something that we've covered in our QGIS program. So if you're interested, please make sure to check those sessions out. And this just about covers it when it comes to exporting vectors out of QGIS and importing them into Google Earth. Now we can take a look at how we can export out rasters. So back inside of QGIS, I'm going to enable the Hillshade map. And just as with vectors, to export a raster out of QGIS, you can just right click on the layer, go under export and choose to save as. This dialog window will open up with all of the exporting settings. We have to first of all decide if we want to export out as raw data or rendered image. When it comes to importing into Google Earth, in most cases, I would say it's better to export out as a rendered image because the file will be of a smaller size, most likely. But if you're going to use the image in other applications that require it to have the raw data, then you should export out as raw data. This is specifically in cases where you are exporting out digital elevation models, for example, and you intend to use those in other applications or even inside of QGIS for the purposes of creating new maps, for example, or running analysis. Now, in this case, we are dealing just with a rendered image because this is just a hillshade map that was created out of a digital elevation model. So there's no point exporting as raw data, even though we could do that if we want to. I'm just going to export it out as a rendered image. This is still going to retain the geospatial information that will be embedded inside of the file, such as the orientation or the location of the image in the world. So it's still going to overlay correctly inside of Google Earth or other applications that we use it in. Now we can choose on file format. I would say 99% of the time just stick to GeoTIFF. But there are all of these other file formats that you can choose from if a project specifically calls for that. We ourselves have never had to change the file format over hundreds or thousands of projects, so we always work with GeoTIFF, and this is in fact the standard in the industry. So I'm just going to leave this at GeoTIFF. Now, if you tick the box where it says create VRT, you're going to be able to split the image down in tiles. You can do that and you will still be able to import those tiles inside of Google Earth. It's just that it may be more time consuming because you may have many tiles to import one by one inside of the application. Now, once you click the create VRT box, then this new VRT tile section is going to appear. From here, you can set the maximum resolution that you want your tiles to have. So at the moment, our image has a resolution of 2000 pixels wide, but if we want our tiles to have a maximum resolution of 500 pixels, let's say, then we can set that here. And QGIS is going to calculate how many tiles it has to break the image down to. Now, just to show you how that looks like, I've already exported this image out in tiles, and here we can see them in this folder. If I want to import these into Google Earth, I'll have to do this one by one, just importing one, then the other, and so on. So it is a little bit more time consuming, and Google Earth does not have a very good capability of importing more than one image at a time. The VRT option could be very useful if you're working with very large rasters. As we've already talked about in other sessions, Google Earth does have a limit on the resolution and file size of images that it can import and display. So if you find yourself in a situation where the image is very large, then this is one of the ways by which you can circumvent this issue. You could either break it down in these tiles, or you could simply reduce the resolution of the entire image and try to import it that way. And this is also something that you can do from the export settings here. So I'm going to uncheck the Create VRT option for now. We've already talked about the extent section and what it does. So now we can go straight into the resolution settings here. From here is where you can reduce the overall resolution of your image if you need to. So if you enable the columns option, you're going to be able to set a custom resolution for this image. So let's say that I want to reduce the resolution of the image by a factor of 2. I'm just going to write 1000 under both columns and rows. And now this is the resolution that the image will be exported to. You could also increase the resolution of the image, but this is not going to give you more details. So if I set this to 4000 pixels wide, for example, this is the resolution that will be applied to the image, but it's just going to look pixelated because we cannot add detail in this manner. 2000 pixels wide is well below the threshold of Google Earth, so I'm just going to leave it at that in this case. Under Create Options, we have the option to apply a compression to the image. This is yet another way by which you can reduce the file size of the image. Now, in this case, we're well below the threshold of the file size that Google Earth can display, so we don't need to do that. But if you had to do it, then you could apply a compression from the list of profiles here. And finally, we have the pyramids and no data values options here. Pyramids is just a way of optimizing the image even further when you're importing it into GIS applications. But unfortunately, Google Earth cannot read pyramids, so it doesn't really matter. So we're not going to cover pyramids in this section, but we have covered this under our QGIS program. So if you're interested, please make sure to check that session out. Similarly, no data values is not going to apply when we are importing rasters into Google Earth, so we are not going to cover it here, but again, it is covered under our main QGIS program. Now all that remains is to apply a file name, so I'm going to click on the ellipsis button to the far right of the file name field. I'm going to call this Hillshade, and I'm going to export it out to my desktop. I'm going to uncheck the Add Save File to Map box because I don't want to import the image again inside of QGIS, and I'm going to make sure to export it out as a rendered image. And with that done, I'm going to click OK. The image was exported, so I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm just going to grab it and drop it inside of the Google Earth viewport. It's going to ask me if I want to create a super overlay to scale the image down or to crop it to a certain section. Now, we've already talked about all of these options under the session on importing rasters in Google Earth, so please make sure to check that session out if you're interested in what all of these settings do. In 99% of the cases, just click on Scale. This is not going to necessarily scale the image down. If it is below the Google Earth threshold, nothing is going to happen to it. It's just going to be imported. But if the image is larger than the threshold that Google Earth supports, then Google Earth is going to scale the image down so that it can display it. But in this case, it's not going to do that because we are well below the threshold. So I'm just going to click on Scale. And now the image is going to be imported. We can give it a name. I'm going to call this just Hillshade. And we have the option to adjust the transparency from the transparency slider. I'm going to leave it at fully opaque. I'm going to delete anything that we have under the description, and I'll press OK. And now we have our map imported, and it should be overlaying properly. And with that done, this covers it for exporting vectors and rasters from QGIS and into Google Earth. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.